And I always make sure to check in. What is Barrett? What's Bearfield? All the crew over there, Hanson. You guys got a great crew over there. So always check them out, Wolfpack. All righty, guys. You ready, Scott, to dig into these top 20 running backs?
Yeah.
Let's do it. So I'm going to pull in my rankings in a second, but they are already not going to look at the consensus. We're going to reference underdog ADP as well. I have that pulled up just because I know that's a lot of you guys tuned in here watching best ball and all that good stuff. So we'll reference that as well in addition to my own personal rankings. But I know that the decision at the top of a lot of drafts, if you get blessed with that number one pick, who are you going to go with, Jonathan Taylor or Christian McCaffrey? I know who I'm leaning, and it's probably not analytically the right answer. But, Scott, if it's up to you, who would you be going?
Yeah, so I feel sort of fraudulent when I say this. I'm going with Jonathan Taylor. And, I have been the Christian McCaffrey guy for years, where it's just no one appropriately values a healthy Christian McCaffrey's upside. It is legitimately incomprehensible in comparison to any fantasy player over the past 20 seasons. He has the upside to break leagues in a way that we've only ever seen peak LaDainian Tomlinson perform. And I was playing fantasy back in those days where it was snake style drafts were broken because you got the 101 and then the 101 won every year. And so you have to just play auction side. And that's really a healthy McCaffrey's upside. I don't think there's any concern over him seeing a reduction in usage given these recent injuries. Every beat writer says that's not the case. Matt Rule is the heavy favorite to be the first head coach fired. So I really think he gets the volume we've seen, which again is unparalleled volume. He is the archetype of all bell cows. He is a round one caliber slot wide receiver when it comes time to be a scat back. And he's also one of the most efficient runners, and he's also the focal point near the end zone. I have always been very optimistic, I guess, when it comes to injuries, where it's just I can't predict that, but I can predict a healthy McCaffrey being far and away the most valuable player in fantasy. I've sort of been walking that back, being a little more pessimistic in my old age. And you look at the injuries McCaffrey has had, notably the soft tissue injuries, and then how slow he's been to heal from those injuries. And you sort of get into the territory of late season Arian Foster injury risk where if he's healthy, he's an easy high end RB1, but those injuries start to add up and it gets concerning. And so again, I feel sort of fraudulent. I think maybe I should just have him the RB1, but I don't. I have Jonathan Taylor RB1. I'd like to quickly state the bull case, which is obvious, and then just come up with my concerns for Taylor that don't exist for McCaffrey and hear your thoughts. Yeah. So I think Jonathan Taylor, his workload is excellent. Obviously, we'd like a few more targets per game. He's not an archetypal bell cow like Christian McCaffrey is. He is more of a workhorse, at least in comparison. But the injury risk is minimal. He's had 250 touches in 5 straight seasons, only missed 1 game, and that was due to COVID. I think he's maybe the most talented running back in football. I've loved him. I really thought he was worthy of a top 10 pick, coming out of college. I think he's going to have 2,000 rushing yards this season. But here's a concern I have, and I haven't heard anyone talk about it. I haven't heard a single person talk about it, but I don't know why. This quote is crazy. Just a quick refresher on Jonathan Taylor. I was lower on Jonathan Taylor than I should have been. I always believed in the talent, but the Athletic beat writers were saying it's going to be a similar committee to the one he was in 2020 when he only played 50% of the team snaps. And that's exactly what we saw through the first 6 weeks of the season. And then Frank Reich came to his senses. That jumped to 76%. So he was second in snap share after those first 6 weeks. He was a full-on bell cow. He was, the clear RB1. He was a fantasy juggernaut, all that stuff. But here's the quote from Frank Reich. I'll give you basically he just hyped the shit out of Nyheim Hines. Mm-hmm. But here's the condensed versions. if I quote unquote, if I was a fantasy owner, if I was going to be in a fantasy league, I think I'd pick Nyheim this year. I think I'd consider drafting Nyheim. I think it's worth it to consider drafting him. Blah, blah, blah. We were a little more run-centric than we wanted to be. Just the way it sort of worked out, but we looked at the numbers. We hoped he'd have more, quote unquote. At the end of the season, when you tally up who has the catches, do we want Nyheim to be one of those top 3 running backs? Yeah, we probably do. And so that's concern. And it's just like, I mean, I get, Taylor is phenomenal. He averaged 24.7 fantasy points per game over his final 13 games, only about 5 fantasy points per game off of McCaffrey's all-time 2019 season. But he just doesn't have the upside with Nyheim Hines in that cemented role where McCaffrey, again, the archetype, is getting all of these carries, all of the snaps, wide receiver 1 levels of target volume. And so to me, again, it's just, hey, like at a certain point, the injuries matter. Am I being cowardly? Am I copping out and just like caving to ADP? I don't know. This is something that's tormented me, but ultimately I sided with Jonathan Taylor as RB1.
Yeah, I think we are in exact lockstep, so I don't want to get too repetitive here. If I could have a crystal ball, you told me that McCaffrey plays 14 games. I'm hitting the number 1 pick, locking it in, certainly if you're getting the whole season. I mean, even in his few games last year, when he played 50% of the snaps or more, RB1, RB3, RB4, RB3. The year before, he averaged 30.1, which was more than he did the season before. We put the second all time. Like,
if I can, 2019, 5th most fantasy points per game by any player in any season all time.
Insane.
2020, 30.1 fantasy points per game, 3rd most by any player in any season all time. Last season, if you just take his 4 healthy games, 22.9 fantasy points per game minus touchdowns. That would be the most ever. But otherwise, 25.9 fantasy points per game, on pace for what would have been the only 4th 1,000 season in NFL history. Like, he's just unbelievable.
I mean, it truly, like, if he stays healthy, he's the number 1 player. So if you have the balls to stomach the injury risk, like, then you won't get an argument from me. I also have the luxury of getting the first overall pick in back-to-back years. We alternate auction and snakes. So the first year I blew all my budget to get him. Of course, he gets dinged up. Next year I get blessed with the number 1 pick. Oh, great. I go right back to the well, and he screws me over again. So beyond just having like the scare of the injury, I am just that negative sludge is still sitting in me that I just can't get over, especially when you got a horse like Taylor who just doesn't get hurt. I mean, I knock on wood. I don't want to jinx it, but college, huge workloads. He just seems like a stallion. As you mentioned, the one time he missed it was for COVID. Like, the guy's a beast. He's not going to miss time, or at least seems far more likely to stay on the field than Christian McCaffrey. But as you mentioned, the ceiling is capped with the passing game. I do expect Hines to be more involved with Matt Ryan. They did. I heard one of your, Dwayne McFarland at your old stomping grounds at PFF was talking about how the Colts led by 40% of the time. That was more than any other team, and it was just a perfect game flow for Taylor. That makes sense. 26 carries inside the 5-yard line. Like, is that going to repeat? I also do think, though, this offense could just be that much better with Matt Ryan. They're talking about playing up-tempo more. So unless they're just, like, getting Nyheim Hines automatically on the field with Taylor, they're swapping out a bit. I could see Taylor just being on the field for really rapid drives. I mean, he's a talented pass catcher in his own right. No McCaffrey, but he can certainly get it done. I mean, when he gets into space, it's just a gazelle getting down the field. So I do think there's, like, even more ceiling. Everyone just talks about how Taylor has downside. I do think there's some ceiling here, too, in the fact that this offense could be significantly better with Matt Ryan than it was with Carson Wentz. If all this training camp is coming to fruition, this hype about the up-tempo, the no-huddle, all that good stuff, as long as that's Taylor in there for it, of course, that means Nyheim Hines is coming in more and Taylor's off, then it won't matter at all. But I do think there's a ceiling that's not really being acknowledged about Taylor either. So I feel comfortable with a safer floor with a ceiling that seems to be kind of ignored as well. That's my opinion, at least.
So again, I do think Hines is more heavily involved, but I do think the offense is going to be significantly better. I think I'd put them like 7th in Super Bowl odds. I think they're like 12th right now. I think I'd put them 7th. And again, I think Taylor rushes for 2,000 yards. Like, I think that happens. That's not just like, I think that could happen. I think he does. Like, I just love the player. It's the best offensive line in football. It's the best running back in football minus a healthy McCaffrey maybe. But yeah.
Love it. So we're in agreement. I'm surprised. I thought I was going to get harpooned for not having McCaffrey one.
What is up, you fantasy wolf? Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, share your thoughts in the comments, check out some more videos, and join the newest Wolfpack by subscribing below.